for the launch of Richard's new book, Do No Harm, An American Tragedy Continues. This is Richard Villasana, and we are celebrating actually today major accomplishment in bringing this book to the world, this world to the book. And we are today wanting to have a conversation right here on all of the social media channels about just why Richard wrote this book and the impact that he has in our work today. Welcome, Richard.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yes. And so, major accomplishment, but there's a big story behind it, and there's a reason that this book is coming to the world now. Let's have that conversation. What is that American tragedy that you're talking about?
So, this is a tragedy that started in 2017. There was a decision made by the Trump administration to do something that, honestly, many administrations have thought about in the past when it comes to stopping this massive flood that we have of people coming up from Central and South America to the United States. And so I'm talking about immigration and the hundreds of thousands of immigrants who come to the southern border every year looking for asylum. And so a very particular policy was launched in 2017. It was called the zero tolerance. And what it did is it made anybody, no matter whether they came to a port of entry or they were crossing in the middle of the desert, coming across the Rio Grande, didn't matter how they got to the U.S., didn't matter if they had papers or not, didn't matter if they were asking for asylum, they were treated as criminals. And what they did is they separated mothers and fathers from their children. And these are children that were extremely young, some as young as 2 years old. And this was something that was unprecedented here in the United States. And this went on for a year because it was not an official policy. And then in June, give or take, of 2018, it became a formal policy. And as soon as it became a formal policy, the ACLU stepped in and got an injunction against this activity. And then a judge ordered the then Trump administration to reunify all of these families that had been separated. And at this time, over the next few years, that number would grow to more than 5,000 families. And so that is the beginning of where this book takes the reader, introduces them to this policy, the ramifications, and then from there, what has been going on for the last 4 years since 2018? How successful has the government been? And that's what the book is all about.
Wow. Think of the impact and what these children, let alone how the parents must feel being separated from their children. Here, they're coming into a country they're not familiar with. And the children, many of them probably have no clue where they're from, let alone where they're being placed. What happens to the children in this case?
So the children were placed in special federal facilities, and the government did its best to match them up to relatives who might already be in the United States. And many of these families did have that person already living in the United States. So let's take for instance, there might be a father who came up in 2016, settled somewhere in the United States, and then communicated with his wife to bring their child up. And so the wife and the child made the journey, got to the border, were detained, were separated, but the federal government made arrangements so that that child would go live with their father. So many children went to live with, the word is called sponsor, and it's just a fancy word for a relative. Um, I would say probably 85-90% of the people, of these children who were placed with a sponsor, were placed with either a parent or an aunt, an uncle, some with distant cousins, and very few with someone who was not directly related to the family. So the children got placed, some got placed quickly, some it took months and months for them to get out of the federal holding to be with a sponsor. But you mentioned something very interesting, and this is something that I do want to impress on you that these children have been separated from their parents. You're right. They speak Spanish, they don't speak English. They have, many of them have no idea where they are from. They just know they're not in their area. They know they're not in their neighborhood, but they really have not much of an idea of
No
where in
idea.
the United
Yeah.
States.
Yeah.
No, they have no idea. And so they're with, at least they're with a relative. That's the wonderful thing. And so there's someone who speaks their language and has their culture. So there is that bit of home, but still, we were, there was a post that we put up about a woman, and now she's, in her 30s, and she was very tearful, sharing that she had left home at 10 years old. Now, this is someone who was born in the U.S., left her home in the U.S. at 10 years old, left because she was getting abused by her mother. And yet this woman is crying because she said, sometimes you just want your mom. You just want your parent to be there with you. You just want someone to turn to when you have disappointments and things don't go well, or you want to share. And these children didn't have that other person. They didn't have their mother there. They didn't have their father there. So just imagine what these children have been feeling for years, not having that other person in their life.
So they're coming new to the country. They don't know the language. They don't know anything about the culture. They don't have. What happens with the children where they can't find a family?
Well, there are some children that have been deported. Now, it's unclear what are the criteria, because there are some children who have had a relative here who got deported. There are others who become kind of wards of the federal government and stay with the federal government, maybe in a foster care situation. But now their future will be uncertain when they turn 18 years old. What will happen to them then? Will they be put out onto the street, as we do with foster children? Or will they be sent back to their country of origin? All of that is up in the air. This has never happened. There is no blueprint to how to handle these children in a situation like this.
So tell us about the work that you do. You have a nonprofit organization called Forever Homes for Foster Kids, and you find people that will adopt, or you find family members that will take these children in. What is your role, and how does this work for you for the work you do in the world?
So the majority of our work before this crisis was working with children who were in the foster care system. Now, children come into foster care for a variety of reasons. It may be abuse, it may be serious neglect, sometimes abandonment. But however they come into foster care, agencies across the country are required by law to go look for their relatives. And so they'll do that. And if a child has been, third, fourth generation, their family's been in the United States for years, they can find an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent. Job done. Child is placed with those relatives, if that's possible, and they go into what we call kinship care. So they're not in the foster care system as a foster child moving from foster home to foster home. Now they're with family members. And that's a wonderful outcome for a child who has been removed from their parents for whatever
Mhm.
reason. Now, these immigrant children are also coming in to the foster care system. And the reason for that is they're going to live with a mother or father, but that mother or father is still undocumented, so they can't get a job. They don't have social security numbers. They may not legally be able to drive. So they have all these economic factors working against them, which means it's keeping the family income level at poverty level or worse. And so things that happen to people who are in poverty, stress, abuse, neglect, turning criminal activity. So all those possibilities kick in. So those children can be picked up by Child Protective Services, removed from their parent, and now placed in foster care. Now, what my organization does is that when we have children, whether they're U.S. born or they're immigrant, no matter how they come into foster care, if they have relatives living in Latin America, we will go look for those relatives and reunite them with their family. I will say this: Most of the time, those family members, whether they're in Guatemala or Brazil or Argentina or Mexico, will know of another relative in the U.S. that the child can stay with. And in almost every case we've worked, the child has been placed with someone who's already in the United States. So they stay here, and now they're with loving, caring family members.
Thank goodness. And so, how many families have you been able to reunite in this way?
Oh, um, hundreds and hundreds. We have, over the years, because I've been doing this for nearly 3 decades, we've helped more than 11,000 children and families to be reunited. So this covers everything: foster children, former foster children, parents who are looking for their children that they've lost touch with, children who are, again, looking for their parents and their relatives, looking for any connection. And that's the big thing here. It's all about connections. It's all about belonging. It's all about having that sense of who you are and where you came from. And that's really what we do. We make that possible for foster children, to have that sense of belonging and to have that sense of love and connection and support.
And that's so vital because um, there are very, very good people in the foster care system, but there's also the horror stories, and we hear a lot of those kind of stories. What happens to the majority of foster kids when they're 18 if they haven't been adopted, or with a family that just totally loves them?
They age out. In most states, they age out. Now, there are other states where they have a choice of staying in foster care, and there are benefits to that. Will give them enough time to finish high school. You need to keep in mind that up to 30% of foster kids, when they get to 18 years old, have not completed high school.
Hmm.
So if they
They're
leave
behind
the
on, yeah.
yeah, so if they leave the foster care system, they're still without a high school degree. And I don't think there's anybody who would disagree that having a high school degree, diploma, is absolutely vital. And if you
Yes.
don't have that, it's so hard to get a job. It's so hard to move up in life. And they're just some basic understandings that high school gives a child. And so these kids would then be proceeding for the rest of their life with that deficiency. And so that's one major problem. But for those who do age out, they're on the street.
They're not ready for that, are they? No,
Oh,
even a lot of adults wouldn't be ready to be out on, to be in a position where they have nowhere to go and no place to be.
we have heard from thousands and thousands of parents. I'm talking parents, not the children. The parents who have said, I wouldn't have been ready at 18 years old. I can't imagine how these kids could be ready. And we also need to keep in mind, they may not have graduated high school. They may have been changing homes on average twice a year. If they've been in for 5 years, that means they've changed homes 10 times.
I can't
That's,
even imagine.
well, the instability
Yeah.
is massive. And then that doesn't take into consideration part of the reason that many foster teens don't graduate is because as they're moved to a new school system, some of those classes may not have been completed, and they have to complete the course to have it on their transcript. So now they go to another school, they may take the same history class 2, 3 times because they just have not gone long enough to get that final exam, to get that grade, to have it marked on their transcript. It's terrible.
So they're really starting out in life, and there is no way that the vast majority of 18-year-olds can be even thought of as grown up and ready to go out and face the world. So it really sets them up for kind of disaster, which in the long run really affects society as a whole because these kids, they get involved in, they turn to crime maybe, or they get sex trafficked. There's so many implications that are far more reaching than just, well, I don't have anywhere to go. I didn't finish high school. I don't, where do I go now?
There's so many things that happen to a foster teen when they age out. Some are immediately homeless. They don't have money. There are many states that let the foster child age out. And I want to paint this picture. You just turned 18 years old. You don't get a birthday cake. What you do get is maybe 10, 15 minutes to put your clothes, whatever clothes you have, into a trash bag, which is going to smell because it's plastic. And if you don't have a suitcase or a backpack, that's what you're going to be moving around in. Just like you see these homeless people who have trash bags full, there you go. They're starting out their new life with that trash bag. Many of them don't have any money whatsoever in their pocket,
I can't
and
imagine.
they get dropped off somewhere downtown at a motel, and that's it. And one senator was talking at a finance committee in Washington D.C., and he echoed this whole problem. He said, "I am championing a homeless shelter." And we put the homeless shelter specifically down the street from the drop off point where we knew the foster kids would be dropped off because we were hoping that they will find the shelter and let us help them.
Mm.
That's how bad it is. And you mentioned sex trafficking. This is important to note. A foster teen who ages out, they can age out at 6 p.m. tonight, and by midnight, they're a sex trafficking victim.
So what is the solution, Richard? I mean, there needs to be something different in our society that there's measures that can be made. I know you do the work that you do, but it's still going to take a lot of collaboration from people that regular people like you, me and you, and also from government. How do we put measures in place that this doesn't happen?
Well, that's a great question. And all of the things that we've been talking about are covered in the book.
Mhm.
It does take us from the immigration problem, the children who are separated, to their being placed with a sponsor, and then moves over to the foster care system because we have tens of thousands of children, specifically who have relatives in Latin America. So that is the focus of the book. But within the last few years, we've had more than 400,000 children coming into foster care every year.
Oh my goodness. Mm.
So, one of the best ways that we can start tackling this problem is that the governments need to allocate enough funds. This is not something where there is a system that can absorb X amount of children. We can just keep putting them in, just adding them in, and thinking that the system is going to somehow magically take care of them, give them the proper, training, give them the proper place to live. There are children right now who are living and sleeping in office floors, in break rooms across the country because there are not enough foster families to take in these children. So the first thing that has to happen is enough money allocated to this problem because there is simply not enough money given to take care of this country's children.
Yes, and there's not enough money. There's measures that need to be put in place because these children, think about, we all have life coming our way and things that kind of smack us up in the face, and if we have a support system, that's all well and good. But think of these children and the long range effects and the depression, the suicide that must happen, and all the other things that they're faced with when it feels so hopeless. There's no one to turn to. And I don't think know many adults that would be able to manage that too well on their own either.
No, there's lots of benefits that a person has when they have connection to family, even if it's just emotional. But you mentioned about suicide. Foster teens and foster children in general are 4 times more likely to think about suicide, to engage in activities that can lead to suicide, to be depressed, and to take action and to try to commit suicide. And this is a whole other area of the foster care system, especially with the levels that we're hearing studies coming out now from the COVID lockdown, how many children were depressed during that period. and we're
Mhm.
still struggling with that. And now we have these foster children who endured the same problems, but they don't have mom and dad to lean on. They don't have that family
No
connection.
connection. No
No,
connection.
they
Yeah.
don't have that. And
Wow.
so, again, it all starts with having enough funding. And there may be people out there who are talking about, and they would be right, that there are lawsuits where millions of dollars are being paid out because of mistakes and illegal activities that some people are doing who are in the foster care system.
Yeah.
But there needs to be enough funding so that you can keep staff members, and those staff members can be trained.
Well, the training and the support, and just even the language barriers when it starts thinking about the children that are coming to the United States, how many are in a position that even those that get into in a foster home where the parents or the people that are taking care of them even know their language or their customs.
Well, that's always been a big problem, especially for Latino children, is
Mhm.
that the vast majority are not Latinos. And I write about that also in the book, about why there should be no expectation of this massive number of Latinos adults coming into the foster care system to be foster parents. There are some cultural reasons why that's not going to happen. And so you do have these children coming in. This is why it is so critical to locate their relatives and to have those relatives share about other relatives where these children can go and can stay with people who are not only can but know their culture, their language, and that they can feel comfortable with. And as far as the training, honestly, there is so much work that needs to be done to have training that will facilitate caseworkers to be able to know how to do just the fundamentals.
Right.
Forget about doing this internationally. Let's just get them to a point where they can do it domestically at a high level.
Very true. What about adoption? Are there people that is I know they make it so costly to adopt a child. What about in this situation? Is there some other special provision? We know so many people that young parents that just can't have children and would love to. What's the situation there?
So when it comes to adoption, there are some misunderstandings. So we hear these numbers of $30,000 and $50,000 for an adoption. What a lot of people don't hear is that that's for private adoptions. They're going to some private organization. They're not going to the foster care system to look for a child. Now, if they want to find a child in the foster care system, the cost for adoption drops significantly, dramatically. In some states, they have a system. Now, Texas has got a system and a process set up where they'll uh, put a couple or a single adult. There's no discrimination there. Someone can be single, they can be married, they can be in a partnership, they can be, gay, they can be straight. It doesn't matter. As long as you're an adult and you have the financial resources, you're our type of person. So I do want to say that because a lot of people don't
Good.
understand that right there. So in doing an adoption, at least in Texas, and I'll expand on that, they get matched up to someone who's like a counselor who will walk them through the whole system. And they have procedures in place that will make it virtually cost free. So, this whole idea that adoption is extremely expensive and people who want to adopt have to take out a loan, well, it all depends upon where you live. There are some states who unfortunately do treat adoption as a cash cow, as a means to make money. And there are other states who want to make this as easy and as no cost as possible. If I remember correctly, Louisiana, the first child is essentially free. The second child, you pay for your fingerprinting, about $30, and that's the cost for the second child.
Wow.
You can't do that. We're talking about a large pizza in today's economy. There's something
Absolutely.
wrong.
Right. Right. Amazing. That's good to know. For those that are listening or will be listening, do no harm. An American tragedy continues. It's available on Amazon. We have the links that are kind of crossing the board here and in the chat. Pick up a copy of this. It's very important that all of us become informed about what is truly happening and the solutions, and the really good solutions that could be put in place if we would all learn to cooperate and just really get along. Richard, it's been a delight to work with you on this, bringing this book to the world. We really need to celebrate. It's quite an accomplishment, as busy as you are, to get a book like this out. It's pretty amazing. So be sure and pick up a copy, and we will be having a lot of social media posts. There's a lot of activity. Richard is well known. He's in many of the interviewed by many news circles, many podcasters, that people are realizing the work that he's doing in the world. And this is a cause to really say kudos to you, Richard, for the work you do.
Well, thank you very much.
All righty. Well, that'll be the end of this live stream, and be sure and pick up a copy. This is a fabulous book. Thank you.
Well, it's been very nice to be here. Thank you so much for your support. And to everyone listening, every copy goes to help a foster child. So it's one of the easiest ways you can help a foster child. Learn about the foster care system. Certainly learn more about our immigration process and some of the challenges that this country is facing, and ways that those problems can be resolved. It's not a question of coming up with brand new ideas that no one's ever heard before. It really gets down to will. Do we have the will to put some of these steps into action? Can we get our government to finally treat children as the precious individuals they are, and to put enough money so that these children are protected, kept safe, and at all possibilities given to a family member or adopted. Either way, giving them a chance at a better, brighter life, so they have that sense of belonging, that sense of support that every child deserves.
Awesome. Very good. Thank you, Richard.